Good evening. On behalf of President Jim Troha, who's traveling this evening and sends his regards, and all of us at Juniata, it's my privilege and pleasure to welcome you to this evening's event. And as we gather, we acknowledge that we are living and working on the traditional lands of the Onyataka, the people of the Standing Stone, the Oneida Nation, who had a village here at the time of colonization. And we pay respect to their elders, past and present. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lauren Bowen. I work at Juniata as the provost or the senior academic officer. And again, it's truly a joy for me to be the one to be able to welcome you and introduce this evening's speaker as part of our week-long series of events to honor and remember the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And in so doing, to recognize the unfinished and ongoing work that he led. To reckon, if you will, with our racialized past and our work for justice. Tonight, Dr. Crystal Sellers Battle will provoke, challenge, and inspire us to engage in that work as we grapple with one of King's most powerful texts. He notes then, nearly 60 years ago, and we live now in a place of tension. And he recognizes that direct action can foster tension that requires us to confront injustice. And what better place to foster tension than a college campus? Our desire and our ability to foster that kind of tension so that we can translate theory into action to make this world better than we found it is truly our mission. And so King notes that we collectively must come to see that the end we seek is a society at peace with itself, a society that can live with its conscience. And so our speaker this evening will challenge us to do that, to situate ourselves individually and collectively into that work. Dr. Crystal Sellers Battle is the Dean of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at Juniata College and has been here since August of 2021. She works to advance programs and policies that promote mindsets and behaviors that value equity, diversity, and inclusion. Among her many accomplishments, she's the co-founder of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity in Musical Arts, which helps schools of music address these challenges. She holds the doctorate in musical arts from The Ohio State University. She holds a master's in music from Roosevelt University and a bachelor's of music from Bowling Green State University. She was previously a professor of music at Bluffton College, where she was a leader of equity, diversity, and inclusion work there. And I can attest personally that she brings, of course, the kind of critical eye that we value in the academy, and yet what I think makes Crystal so special is that she channels King in bringing a spirit of joy and generosity and a commitment and belief that we are capable of engaging in this work. So please join me in welcoming Crystal Sellers Battle.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Provost Bowen, for the warm introduction. And I would ask that you would stand with me as we sing the Black National Anthem. Lift every voice and sing, and you'll see the words on the screen. Every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling seas. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new yet with a steady beat, let not our weary feet come to the place for which our Father sighed. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered, out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land. Thank you. You may be seated. So, as a little bit of a disclaimer, I tend to sing more comfortably in front of thousands than I do speaking in front of 10. And so I just want to give you that slight preamble. I am thankful to have this opportunity to share with each of you this evening. I am also thankful for the many colleagues and students with whom I've been able to interact on a daily basis. Your support, warmth, and challenge are what inspire me to be a better person continually. Thank you to President Troha, who is on a plane heading west to the NCAA meetings in Indianapolis, who takes time with me to support the planning of these and other EDI-related events. Thanks to the members of SLT and Tracy Grayevsky for taking a chance on me a few months ago. To the Board of Trustees, some of who are joining us via Zoom this evening, thank you for your continued support. Thank you to the members of the Bias Response Team and EDI Council who are here tonight. Thank you for your challenge and support. And last but not least, thank you to my student workers, campus development interns and Juniata assistants who keep the momentum going and make the magic happen. Why am I crying? Liv Simmons, Brandy Ray, Jean Barrera, Jada Murray, Citlali Lopez, and H.J. Zamansky. You mean more to me than you'll ever know. Special thanks. Special thanks to each of you in the audience, and thanks to those who are attending via Zoom, which includes my mom from Ohio, my uncle from Ohio, and my husband and daughter, Carrie. So everyone say, hi, family. They will probably kill me for that later, but you know I take opportunities when I have the microphone. Before I begin, I'd like to share a little history on the song that we just sang together. Lift Every Voice and Sing was a song created in collaboration between two brothers, John Rosamond and James Weldon Johnson. James, a poet, wrote the stanzas of the poem roughly around the turn of the century, which was set to music shortly thereafter by his brother John. James, a lawyer, diplomat, and professor, was the first African-American leader of the NAACP at the turn of the century. John, a prolific pianist who studied at the New England Conservatory, was unheard of at that time. And he set his brother's words to music using a combination of classical musical structure with the harmonies of the African-American choral music of the time. The song, first performed by 500 school children in Jacksonville, Florida, became an unofficial song of the movement for African Americans and the NAACP from its inception in 1900. In 1919, the NAACP proclaimed it the Negro National Anthem, a full 12 years before the Star-Spangled Banner was adopted as the national anthem for the U.S. under President Hoover. As with the national anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing is often sung at the start of a major event in the African American community. It is customary to stand while it's sung in the same manner that we sing for the Star-Spangled Banner. And I will say, however, this song is not left up to interpretation in the same way that the Star-Spangled Banner often is. Fergie, Shaka Khan, Roseanne Barr, and others. If you have not seen their tragic versions of the Star-Spangled Banner, you will have a blast on YouTube finding them. So, now to what I am here to share through the lens of a letter from a Birmingham jail. Dr. King's letter, written April 1963, starts with these words. While confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling our present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom, if ever, do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas. If I sought to answer all of the criticisms that come across my desk, my secretaries would be engaged in little else in the course of the day, and I would have no time for constructive work. But since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill and your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I would like to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. I think I should give the reason for my being in Birmingham, since you have been influenced by the argument of outsiders coming in. I have the honor of serving as president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization operating in every southern state with headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. We have some 85 affiliate organizations all across the South, one being the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights. Whenever necessary and possible, we share staff, educational, and financial resources with our affiliates. Several months ago, our local affiliate here in Birmingham invited us to be on call to engage in a nonviolent direct action program if such were deemed necessary. We readily consented, and when the hour came, we lived up to our promises. So I am here, along with several members of my staff, because we were invited here. I am here because I have basic organizational ties here. Beyond this, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the 8th century prophets left their little villages and carried their "thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just like the Apostle Paul left his little village of Tarshish and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to practically every hamlet and every city of the Greco-Roman world, I too am compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my particular hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. End quote. After arriving here in Juniata on August 16th, it has been a full steam ahead process to think about my journey and my plan for progressing the work of equity, diversity, and inclusion on our campus. The journey has not always been the smoothest. There have been days where it seemed like the work would not make a difference to anyone until I sit down with students and colleagues and learn that in some small or large way, the work is speaking for itself. Taking time to pause this week to remember the life and work of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is an important milestone in the work of EDI. The very message of Dr. King's life is to hear and understand that there is a need for equity among all Americans, to realize that we all deserve an opportunity to have the basics: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. For most of my life, I have heard many of the key quotes from this letter, especially around MLK Day, some of which you will hear in a moment. It wasn't until around 2011 that I became familiar with the entire letter. Every fall for the last 10 years, I taught a first-year experience course called Becoming a Scholar at my previous institution. In this course, we helped first-year students as they navigated their transitions from high school into college. In doing so, we read essays and book excerpts to help each of us to discover who we are as individuals, but also what our place in the world means for others. We read from Parker Palmer, Bell Hooks, Ken Bain, Sheryl Sandberg, many others. For many of the early years of teaching this course, Dr. King's letter was included until about 3 years ago. During a revision of the course, the reading was removed. What troubled me the most was thinking about how important this letter was and still is, and how we've become afraid to tackle challenging subjects, the very reason why the reading was removed. I asked the revision committee to reconsider, promising that I would help others teach the course and help the others teaching the course to think about ways to engage with this text. And I'll be honest with you, I could stand here and read this letter from start to finish while properly citing the source, ensuring that the words are not falsely attributed to me, and that could honestly be enough. There is so much here that is so relevant to our world at this time. However, I won't do that in hopes that you have already or may take the time to read this letter on your own. So here's a little backstory for those who may not be familiar as to how Dr. King ended up in police custody on that April day in 1963. After discovering a number of challenges happening in Birmingham, such as broken promises to remove discriminatory signage in stores and a contentious mayoral election, he took to Birmingham to march and called for an Easter time boycott of local merchants. He was arrested for staging the march in protest without a permit. At the time, 8 white moderate members of the clergy wrote to the Birmingham News criticizing the march and protest. Here are their words. They may sound a bit familiar. We, the undersigned clergymen, are among those who, in January, issued an appeal for law and order and common sense in dealing with racial problems in Alabama. We expressed understanding that honest convictions in racial matters could properly be pursued in the courts, but urged that decisions of those courts should in the meantime be peacefully obeyed. Since that time, there has been some evidence of increased forbearance and a willingness to face facts. Responsible citizens have undertaken to work on various problems which caused racial friction and unrest. In Birmingham, recent public events have given indication that we all have opportunity for a new constructive and realistic approach to racial problems. However, we are now confronted by a series of demonstrations by some of our Negro citizens, directed and led in part by outsiders. We recognize the natural impatience of people who feel that their hopes are slow in being realized. But we are convinced that these demonstrations are unwise and untimely. We agree, rather, with certain local Negro leadership, which has called for honest and open negotiation of racial issues in our area. And we believe this kind of facing of issues can best be accomplished by citizens of our own metropolitan area, white and Negro, meeting with their knowledge and experiences of the local situation. All of us need to face that responsibility and find proper channels for its accomplishment. Just as we formally pointed out that hatred and violence have no sanction in our religious and political tradition, we also point out that such actions as incite to hatred and violence, however technically peaceful those actions may be, have not contributed to the resolution of our local problems. We do not believe that these days of new hope are days when extreme measures are justified in Birmingham. We commend the community as a whole, and the local news media and law enforcement officials in particular, on the calm manner in which these demonstrations have been handled. We urge the public to continue to show restraint should the demonstrations continue, and the law enforcement officials to remain calm and continue to protect our city from violence. We further urge our own Negro community to withdraw support from these demonstrations and to unite locally in working peacefully for a better Birmingham. When rights are consistently denied, a cause should be pressed in the courts and in negotiation among local leaders and not in the streets. We appeal to both our white and Negro citizenry to observe the principles of law and order and common sense. Signed, Bishop Carpenter, Bishop of Alabama, Auxiliary Bishop Joseph Durek, Rabbi Hilton Grafman, Bishop Paul Hardin, Bishop Holland Harmon, Bishop Coadjutor George Murray, Moderator Edward Ramsage, and Pastor Earl Stallings. a return to law and order and common sense. Have you heard those words recently? Before I move on, I want to acknowledge that descriptors like Negro and colored are antiquated terms and shouldn't be used as a descriptor today. So, as I reflect on those words, I can almost imagine a similar set of words being uttered in the summer of 2020. I distinctly remember a public call for calm, common sense, and a reduction in demonstrations in order to maintain a sense of normalcy in a chaotic time. What Dr. King's words say to us in his letter of response are that as long as injustice exists, there can be no sense of normal. We could add our own paraphrases like as long as COVID exists, as long as police brutality exists, as long as racism exists, as long as xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia exists, as long as religious persecution exists, as long as social economic divide increases, as long as gender inequities exist, there simply cannot be a sense of normal. This phrase from his letter is often quoted: injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. It's the remainder of the paragraph that speaks to the root nature of that statement. We are caught, and the quote says, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with a narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds, end quote. Living in this space of mutuality, we must understand that what impacts you impacts me, directly, indirectly, proximal, or peripheral. We are in a network of connectedness that has to be understood and respected. When we see our neighbor, friend, colleague, or even foe struggling, we must understand that in some way it is a part of us. It is also our duty to not only focus on the effects, but also to look for the root cause of the issue. This can only be discovered if we do it together. The true nature of equity, diversity, and inclusion work rests on the ideal that immediate gratification is not the goal. Systemic and holistic change is. This process takes time. In our world where we reap the benefits of microwavable results, sometimes things just need to be processed in a slow cooker. However, there is this dichotomy that makes you realize that in some ways the wait has been forever. Some things need to change and to do so quickly. There were many things that Dr. King desired to see improve during his lifetime, many of which never came to fruition. However, that does not mean that the effort and the desire to move forward is not useful. As a matter of fact, it's necessary. We are all interconnected. As Dr. King is quoted, justice too long delayed is justice denied. There will indeed be moments when justice will inevitably be delayed. That is the reality of our world at the moment. Where justice becomes denied is when it takes too long. We must remember that as we do our work, it may not result immediately, but if we don't do the work, it never will. As I reflect on where we are as a Juniata community, we are like many places in the world at a crossroads. A place of deciding which path seems like the most feasible to take. Whether it is the path that seems eerily similar to paths we've taken in the past, or a path that takes a subtle curve towards a new horizon but involves some minor bumps in the road, or the road that seems the most difficult to traverse but will lead to true lasting change. This path is by no means straight. It isn't even paved, but it's the best path. Traversing this path will take time, bravery, pain, frustration, disagreement, and challenge. It's no yellow brick road. This will seem like an awkward segue, but bear with me. I promise it's going to come together. Our family loves to take cruises as a means of travel. My husband and I especially love the larger ships that feel like a floating resort. Some of these ships hold in upwards of 7,500 guests and employees, so they are no small vessels. Imagine that the captain of this vessel is told that this ship has to adjust course immediately with no time to plan for contingencies. Well, if you've seen one of these boats, you know that nothing happens quickly. Some of the fastest maneuvers, I am sure, take hours of planning to do just right. Just simply adjusting the course without planning can cause people to be injured in ways that could be irreparable. The same holds true when deciding to take the road not traveled. These roads don't have pavement. They have many obstacles in the way. They are dangerous and just outright difficult to manage. What is often necessary are advanced scouts to check out the lay of the land. Those scouts also need to lead those who've never been that way through the rough terrain. But sometimes the advanced scouts just lay the framework. Moses wandered in the wilderness for 40 years in an attempt to reach the promised land. But just because he never arrived, it doesn't mean that his work to lead his people out of Egypt and toward the promised land was in vain. Just because Dr. King did not get to see some of his advanced scouting work make a difference in his lifetime doesn't mean that his work was for naught. We may not see all the changes necessary to make Juniata a place for all in our lifetime as students, faculty, or staff here, but that does not diminish the work that we are doing and needs to be done right now. We are laying the framework for continued growth and navigation. In order for us to begin the work, it's important to understand just what the work is. When I arrived on campus, one of my personal goals was to learn Juniata's campus in a way that helps to drive what EDI means for us here now. Simply put, what does equity mean for us? What does diversity look like? And how do we embrace inclusion? For Juniata today, equity means ensuring that all receive the same thing. For students, acquisition of a quality collegiate education. For faculty and staff, access to a safe and supportive working environment. But our work is not to just get our students to cross the finish line of graduation and into post-baccalaureate success, but to ensure that their race can be supported through identification and eradication of as many obstacles as possible. This will also mean that we will have to examine what we do and say daily to ensure that we are not creating those obstacles. Diversity embraces the varying races, ethnicities, gender identities, socioeconomic statuses, religious beliefs, and sexual orientations that make us who we are. However, diversity goes beyond the acknowledgement of the presence of these varying perspectives. It lives in understanding and appreciating how there are similarities within our diversity, and it makes us who we are individually and collectively. What diversity must do is not only put a spotlight on our similarities and differences, but celebrate them as well. Learn from them. Support the amplification of those distinct viewpoints. All of them. Inclusion here at Juniata is the measure we must strive towards in making it standard operating procedure for all to have a place on our campus and in our community. A place that is respected, understood, supported, and appreciated. It is the goal line that we must strive towards in order to make true equity and diversity a part of our very fabric. African-American author and poet Bell Hooks, who we lost recently, said these words, quote, "Beloved community is formed not by the eradication of difference, but by its affirmation. By each of us claiming the identities and cultural legacies that shape who we are and how we live in the world," end quote. Where we miss the mark in this work can be seen in the example of the clergymen writing to the Birmingham newspaper. We often believe that we are well-intentioned when calling out what we see as wrong from a perspective of pointing the finger. It often resides in a place of bringing attention to a small group without thinking about what it truly means for us as a collective. It feels impressive to identify the problems, but not to do the work to identify the root cause. I've used this analogy many times since I've arrived. I arrived on a campus where people were hemorrhaging. I had to find the balance between being the emergency room doctor to address the immediate triage needs and spending time as the internist or diagnostician who wants to take time to research and investigate the root cause. In the true work of EDI, it's imperative that both exist. However, it takes an army of people to do it. I ask that we consider if we are a part of the emergency room team, the diagnostic team, or are we sitting in the parking lot identifying that there are so many people in the hospital in the first place? Have we decided to roll up our sleeves and pitch in? I'm sure you're asking, well, how do I do that? I am so glad you asked. You can become an advocate for equity, diversity, and inclusion, not only in Juniata, but also in your local communities. Consider your personal strengths and see how they can personally advance the mission of equity or diversity or inclusion. Be comfortable speaking out as a group advocate to address change needed. Join EDI Council, serve as an advisor and or supporter for a cultural affinity student organization, plan conversations, presentations, topics around equity, diversity, or inclusion. Take students, friends, or colleagues with you to opportunities for engaged dialogue around difficult topics. It requires being brave and bold, but it also requires collaboration and support. While I would love to believe that I can make the changes necessary for all by myself, I know I can't. I will need help just as you will when embracing this work. Okay, let me see if I can turn it back on. Oh, you got it? Okay, thank you. I will need help just as you will when embracing this work. Dr. King knew that the support of his wife, his friends, and colleagues are what helped him to reach those who needed him the most. Imagine how the Montgomery bus boycott or the March on Washington would have looked if he had to do all the work by himself. We need each other. I want to acknowledge some key African American figures who we've lost recently who paved the way for many of us no matter who we are. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the author that I mentioned earlier, Bell Hooks, actor Sidney Poitier, and just yesterday, Andre Leon Talley. One thing that I find fascinating is the ability to hear the words of these key figures shared largely after their death. For many of these words, I wish I could have embraced them and heard them sooner. I'd like to share with some of them with you as I close. Bishop Desmond Tutu, Archbishop of the Anglican Church in South Africa, shared these words: to treat anyone less than human, less than a brother or sister, no matter what they have done, is to contravene the very laws of our humanity. He also said, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of the mouse and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not necessarily appreciate your neutrality. Acclaimed author and the first Black actor and Bahamian to win an Oscar, Sidney Poitier, shared these words: we're all imperfect, and life is simply a perpetual, unending struggle against those imperfections. Dr. King's letter ends with these words: I wish you had commended the Negro demonstrators of Birmingham for their sublime courage, their willingness to suffer, and their amazing discipline in the midst of the most inhuman provocation. One day the South will recognize its real heroes. They will be the James Merediths, courageously and with a majestic sense of purpose, facing jeering and hostile mobs and the agonizing loneliness that characterizes the life of the pioneer. They will be old, oppressed, battered Negro women, symbolized in a 72-year-old woman of Montgomery, Alabama, who rose up with a sense of dignity and with her people decided not to ride the segregated buses and responded to one who inquired about her tiredness with an ungrammatical profundity. My feet is tired, but my soul is rested. They will be young high school and college students, young ministers of the gospel, and a host of their elders courageously and nonviolently sitting in at lunch counters and willingly going to jail for conscience sake. One day the South will know that when these disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for the best in the American dream and the most sacred values in our Judeo-Christian heritage. Never before have I written a letter this long, or should I say a book. I'm afraid that it is too much to take. It is much too long to take your precious time. I can assure you that it would have been much shorter if I had been writing from a comfortable desk. But what else is there to do when you're alone for days in the dull monotony of a narrow jail cell other than write long letters, think strange thoughts, and pray long prayers? End quote. In my closing, I would like to take artistic license and share with you a small portion of my letter to the Juniata community, and a version closely related to MLK's letter. Greetings, Juniata community. You may ask why I'm here. I am here because I was called to be here, to do the very difficult work of equity, diversity, and inclusion, to help our community be the place where equity-mindedness doesn't just mean achieving the same thing, but also eliminating barriers that prevent all from reaching that milestone, to help us celebrate the similarities and differences that we bring to this place, and while doing so, appreciating and respecting each person's individual place in this space at this moment. Never before have I written a speech this long. Maybe too long for your patience. But what my calling tells me to do is to take the time to respond to the call for my work in this place and in this time. I call on each of you to join me on this journey. It may not be easy, and we collectively may not always get it right, but we will definitely get it wrong if we don't try. Blessings and peace to you all. Thank you for your time. Signed, Dr. Crystal Sellers Battle, Dean of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at Juniata College.